morning, all. So
Hello.
happy to be here with Neil, who I hadn't gotten to see before coming to this event in, I think, like decades. So it's great to be back here with you. So Neil, you started Index around the time that Netscape went public. Your family's been coming to Greece for decades. I know you said your children sort of cherish their Greek passports almost above any other. You were coming here well before anybody was talking about Athens and startups in the same sentence. What do you think has changed that makes this moment special?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing in Greece is also a function of what we're seeing in Europe, right? I mean, when we started the firm in 1996, we literally had to have a slide in our deck when we were raising money that said, "What is venture capital?" and explain it to people. And people were not insulted. They were like, "Thank you. This is helpful." And that would have been true, pretty much everywhere in Europe in 1996. The same would apply for, the understanding of what startups are and how they fund themselves and what their aspirations can be. Roll the clock forward, 30 years. There's been a huge change, and European startups are raising as much money every year in the early stages as U.S. startups. There are hundreds of companies that have reached significant valuations. I mean, the total value of startups in Europe is in the trillions. It's very significant, and I think that has trickled across Europe, and more countries have figured out that the only way forward, in terms of growth in this world is to invest in young people who are innovating and starting new businesses and being entrepreneurial. And the countries that get that are the countries that have decided to really enable that, make it easier for those people, and support them. And Greece is one of those countries. I feel like Greece is now in a moment where, and it has been for a while, that the government understands this. There's always been a lot of great schools in Greece, great universities, engineering schools, great talent has been produced in Greece for a long time. A lot of it goes abroad. But now people are realizing that they can actually start businesses here, capital flows. So it's a great moment.
That's great. I wanted to just ask you personally, so you stepped back from Index a few years ago. How are you involved in any way in the firm anymore? Or are you still sort of investing in startups? What does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah. So just some background on that. When we started the firm, we deliberately said we wanted to build something that would outlast us as a firm. We didn't put our name on the door, and we said that we had seen so many other firms kind of get to a certain peak in terms of knowing what they were doing, having a track record, having momentum, and then kind of decline over the next decade because the founders would never step back, and the younger team that they had trained that had all this talent were saying, what are we doing here? You're not going to be able to work as hard as you did when you shouldn't want to work as hard as you did when you were 25 or 30. Right. And I'm just going to go across the street and start my own firm. So we kind of engineered this very deliberate passing of the baton from one generation to another. And that's why I stepped back from active investing a few years ago. But as a founder, it's your baby. You never really, even when you send them out into the world, you don't forget about them. So I'm still very much in touch with my partners. I talk to them about various firm issues. I try to mentor the younger people. I try to remind them of the culture and make sure that I'm sort of like a cultural chiropractor, I think. And I still spend time with entrepreneurs. I still have a portfolio that I look after, and And I can't help but talk to entrepreneurs who I come across who are doing interesting things, and sometimes I'll consider working with them or investing in them. But most of my investing is now as an LP in Index.
Well, I want to say I really have always admired the culture of Index because it's such a powerful firm, but it's managed to be sort of low-flying in interesting ways that I want to touch on. But speaking of, I guess, VCs here, I wonder, there's obviously lots of founder talent. I was also part of a founder roundtable yesterday, and I was sort of astonished by the human capital in the room. In terms of the sort of guidance that the founders here are receiving, do you think there are enough VCs who've been on the journey of helping or leading companies scale? And if not, how does Athens attract them?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last one.
Sure, I'm just wondering how Athens, if they're the VCs who
Yeah.
founders need are here, and how we bring more in
Yeah.
this region.
I mean, yes, but they don't have to be local. I feel like in this world, I mean, just the way information flows, and investors like Index and our peers will very readily come to Athens for a meeting or meet somebody somewhere else. It's very easy, I think, to invest across Europe, and we've seen, the old complaint that you've heard in some countries that there's not enough capital and like the government needs to do more, which you used to hear in places like Greece a long time ago. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, if you're doing something that's convincing, that's ambitious, that has a chance of conquering the world, capital will flow to you, advice will flow to you, partners and firms will travel to board meetings and happily work with you and sit on your board. And in Athens, not to mention the fact that there are worse places to be. The quality of life and the things you can do here, people will want to stay an extra day and stay the weekend or bring their family. So I think, yeah, there's no excuse for that. And also just in the world of AI, I mean, there's just so much insight and advice and power that entrepreneurs can derive from using those services and those tools.
Absolutely.
There's never been a better time.
Well, we were talking on the phone last week, and I was telling you that one thing that I thought was exciting and also kind of interesting is I was here at this festival last year and loved it just as much. And I did get to meet a number of VCs here, many more than were here a decade ago, which was phenomenal. A lot of them have small funds. I was in a room full of these investors, and I said, how many of you are sort of collaborating on deals or syndicating your deals? And really nobody raised their hand. And I thought that was sort of curious, and I wonder what you make of that.
I mean, I didn't really mention this in my last answer, but I do think that the entrepreneurs here who have started venture funds are thoughtful, are doing it for the right reasons, have real value that they can bring. The network is very tight. I do feel like it's quite collaborative in a sense that people want Greece to win, not necessarily this VC versus that VC. And I think they understand that, with all the good intentions and goodwill and events and actions, the only thing that really matters is what are the outcomes, right? Like how many companies can we talk about that have emerged from this ecosystem that are recognized around the world and that will cause people to say, oh yes, I get it, Greece is now on the map, and we should have no questions about going to start our company there because there's an ecosystem. I do think the funds get that, and there's a collaborative spirit, which is actually a big deal in Greece because traditionally, and I can say this because I've been coming here for a long time, and my wife is Greek, and so I can say things that are a little bit critical, but I think because I still love the place. But I mean, traditionally, one of the things that I think was horrible about business in Greece was there was this kind of zero-sum mentality where you can win, but you can only really win if the other guy really loses. And I think that's past, and I think this generation doesn't do that and wants to sees the benefit in collaboration for a win for the whole country. And you don't have that everywhere.
Well, I wanted to ask, because you've seen emerging ecosystems in so many places.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that was sort of specifically a Greek thing at all, or if, how it sort of compares to other burgeoning ecosystems.
Yeah, I think it relates to countries where there's a very strong national identity, a strong attachment to their history, kind of a feeling of being an underdog. I think Finland definitely has that. You feel that there. You feel that in Israel. You don't see that everywhere.
I did want to sort of relatedly ask you, we were talking a little bit about this backstage, but when you think about ecosystems that have broken through, clearly, Tel Aviv, Berlin, Stockholm, what do they have in common? Or what was sort of like the tipping point?
I think I think it really comes back to what I was saying earlier about outcomes. Like you can have all of the pieces in place and incentives. I think you really need that bellwether company or those bellwether founders to emerge to kind of validate it. But the other thing is, I think it's really important that that making that place synonymous with a startup ecosystem resonates with everybody. Not only the government and all the parts of the government, accepting to support this as a priority, as a not one of 12 priorities, but as the priority, but also the country. One thing I find really amazing in Finland with Slush, and I know how inspirational Slush has been to the organizers of this conference, which I think is fantastic, because I think it's to my mind like the best example of how to run one of these conferences is that you feel like the whole country is behind it. Even people who are not volunteering are volunteering. They want you to come there and to support this thing, and they see how important it is for the country, for the youth, for the economy, for the future of the country. So I think that's really important, and I think that is true in the other places that have emerged as well.
I feel like everything is sort of cyclical. Right now, it really feels in many ways like the U.S., the Bay Area specifically, is the center of gravity. Something striking to me, something like 75% of all AI venture dollars went to U.S. companies and 6% went to Europe. You've spent your career talking about the fact that great companies can emerge from anywhere. I just wonder, do you think or worry that AI is changing that equation in any way?
I don't. I think I still fundamentally believe that. By the way, a lot of those early AI, or even current AI entrepreneurs and scientists, were not born in the U.S., right? They came from other places and they went to the U.S. to go to school or to work for a company. So DNA-wise, it still validates my premise.
Yeah.
I think, we're at this specific moment. Yes, it feels like the center of AI is San Francisco, and the foundation models are all based there. But I think there will be other models, and I think the idea of sovereignty with this data and these services is important. And there are initiatives that are focusing on that and making sure that we're not completely beholden to models that are of national interest to one country. Any country, but also, you mentioned Netscape. I mean, are these companies Netscape? Are they Google? In terms of where we are in the arc of this next kind of paradigm shift with AI, I think it's still very early innings, and I think we're going to see many very significant companies be born not just in the U.S., but not just in San Francisco, but elsewhere as well, including in Europe and perhaps in Greece.
Well, one thing that's pretty interesting, and you and I were talking about this because you were in San Francisco last week. I'm sure some of you are aware of this, but there is tremendous wealth being generated in the Bay Area specifically right now. Something like 20,000 OpenAI and Anthropic, no, I'm sorry, something like 10,000 OpenAI and Anthropic employees have something like $20 million in wealth that they are spending on housing and driving up rent. And this is before these companies go public, and of course SpaceX is going public too. So it's sort of exciting being there, but I can see in real time how entrepreneurs are potentially going to get priced out quickly. I'm just wondering, when there is that kind of concentration of wealth, which we have seen a couple of times in the tech industry, what does that mean for the rest of the ecosystems?
Yeah, I think it's a good point to bring up. I think one of the things that I think about a lot is the moral center of tech companies. When I was in college at Stanford in 1984, the first Macintosh dropped, and Apple gave big discounts to students at the university so we could all experience the Mac. And I remember this feeling of like, wow, this company is doing something really significant, really cool, really innovative, but also really great for humanity. Like this tool, I mean, this was really the first, really usable personal computer that could be used by anybody. And Steve Jobs and, the founders of Apple were just, for me, heroes. Clearly they were going to be fantastically wealthy, but they were doing something that was cool, but also positive for humanity. And I think there are still many, many founders who are doing the same thing, but there are many founders who are not doing that. And the saddest thing is when I hear sometimes my own children, who also went to college in California, talk about tech companies the way we used to talk about defense companies, or McDonnell Douglas, the military-industrial complex, which was, so like nobody wanted to go work for those companies or cigarette companies. And I feel like we're at a real turning point here, where if I could talk to Jobs, through AI, I would like to talk to him about this and see what he thinks. But I think that it's really important for these companies to remember that, and they can't just usurp that. They can't just say we're just like Jobs. You have to, your company has to live by those values. And then on your topic of wealth imbalance, I think, when we have trillionaires walking around, and we also have the kind of, abject poverty and, lack of access to basic services in so many countries, not, in the West as well. I have a strong sense that there will be some sort of a redistribution, and it'll either be voluntary or it'll be involuntary, but it'll happen, and I hope it's voluntary. Yeah. And I think these companies and these leaders can play a leading role in seeing that through.
We're out of time, I know, but I feel like I'd be remiss if, on behalf of the founders in the audience, I didn't ask what is the one thing in common that all the founders that you've written a check to share?
We're very, very focused on people as a firm. Our investment thesis, our style investing is really founder driven. That's not true for all investors. Someone think great business. If this founder makes it, great. If not, we'll find somebody else. If that happens in our companies, that's not our favorite outcome. So they have to be compatible with us. They have to have very high integrity, and they have to be willing to work with somebody like us. They have to want to work with us and want us to be real partners, where they can share their worst fears and know that that we're going to be wanting to help them. They don't have to kind of hide things or only share the good news. I've said this in other places, but I think one quality that we look for, that I look for, is the ability to be completely stubborn and bullheaded about your vision, because you need to be as a founder, but also once in a while to say, you know, this is an important decision. I don't really know. I'm going to go talk to these 3 or 4 people I trust, get different points of view, weigh them up, make a decision, and then go back to being a bull. And that combination of confidence, but also open-mindedness and willingness to change your mind and listen is rare, but that's something we really look for.
Amazing. I wish we had much more time. Neil, thank you so much.
Thanks, Connie.
Great to spend time with you. Thanks, everybody.